Hi, I'm Stacy Field, Workforce Planning Coordinator at the Workforce Council. My colleague, Vicky Myer, who is our Policy Coordinator. I don't do podiums, so I'm not going to stand over there for obvious reasons. I'd like to say hello, let you know, the Workforce Council does do a range of workforce planning and workforce development activities. We're a peak organisation for workforce and health and community services. One of the things that I've been doing lately is running training on how to do workforce planning. And I'm actually seeing a couple of alumni in the audience, which is really, really nice to see. Workforce planning for the disability sector is something that's, it's real hot right now because of all the reasons that Jane has identified. So what I'm going to talk about before we get into the data is where that data sits within a holistic and future-focused approach to workforce planning. So what you can see up on the screen is our workforce planning framework. The important thing about this process is that the way that the Workforce Council works at an organisational level when we're doing consultancies or training, at an industry level or at a regional level is guided by this same framework. So the same actions and activities that we undertake in an organisation are similar to the ones that happen at a sector or industry level. So we're going to talk today, and we're going to focus very much around the forecast and design and understand and analyse phase, because that will have useful information for you in your organisations, but also useful information at a sector level. And very important information at a sector level. So this is where the data and the planning intersect. This is very much the research phase of the workforce planning process. And anyone who has done workforce planning will realise that this is where you spend most of your time. This is where you get the guts and the evidence to build a really strong workforce plan that's both future-focused and holistic. We'll talk first about the forecast and design phase. So this is where this very much fits with the information that Jane presented earlier, the information that's coming out of the trial sites. This is actually about asking the question, what will future demand look like? What will our service delivery need to look like in order to meet that future demand? And this is where a lot of services from the disability sector are looking to the trial sites, are looking to information that's coming out and thinking about much of the information that Jane presented this morning to consider, well, what kind of a workforce will we need into the future? And you can't actually design your future workforce without doing that analysis of what is the future going to look like and how will we need to deliver services into the future? What will quality service delivery look like into the future? So from that information, you can then look at your future workforce. Next slide, thank you. And you can ask the question, what sort of a workforce will your organisation need to achieve its vision and mission into the future? It's going to be a very different future, we all know that. But what kind of an organisation will you need? And the elements that you need to think about in relation to that are, as has been identified, all of the roles that you will need across your organisation. Whether it's somebody to actually to provide that mediation point between information technology and communication, how your staff use it and how your clients use it. That's something that's coming up quite often as I'm going out and talking to disability services or as they're doing training. What are the characteristics of the staff that you will need into the future? Some of the things that are coming up as I talk to disability services are we're going to have to be very flexible. Our workforce is going to need be very flexible in terms of their skills, in terms of the hours that they're going to work, in terms of their adaptability to what the clients will need into the future. We also need to identify what specific skills and what qualifications will our staff need into the future. So this is very much about getting a very clear picture of the workforce that you need into the future. Once you've got that vision, it's much easier to work towards it. Before you start working towards it though, you need to be able to understand and analyse what you've currently got. And this is often where we run into some issues, and we'll talk a bit more about this at a sector level. But understanding and analysing your current workforce is actually about being able to build a really solid profile of your workforce. So looking at, what's your age profile in your organisation? What qualifications and training do your staff have? How long have they actually been with you? Or how long have staff traditionally stayed with you? What's your retention rate? What does employment status look like? How many full-time staff do you have? How many part-time staff do you have? How many temporary or casual staff do you have? What are the role types that you have? And what are the aspirations of your staff? Now, I wanted to do a quick survey of folks in the room. And I wanted to get you to have a think about, on a scale of 1 to 5, what your workforce profile looks like. And when I say I don't want to find out how old your staff are or anything like that, what I'm really wanting to find out is how confident would you be that you would be able to easily access that information in your organisation. So 5 is, I'm absolutely confident, I've got the report in my handbag. Number 1 is we've actually got a bit of work to do. It might be somewhere, but it might be in filing cabinets, and somebody would have to pull all that information together. So how many 5s do we have in the room? Yep. Not in your handbag? Okay. Put your hand down. So how many 3s would we have? People who are like, we've got it, but it's a little bit shaky. How many 1s do we have in the room? That's good news. I actually get quite surprised when I start speaking to organisations, and sometimes quite large organisations as well, when we start trying to look at this data and this information, at how many gaps there are in the information that's available at an organisational level. So what we're going to be encouraging you to do today is to ensure that you actually have some information, not just, people would talk about it as HR information, but when you're thinking about workforce planning and thinking about being strategic about your workforce, it's about ensuring that you've got this information and that you can track this over time to see how your organisation is going. That you can actually present a very clear picture of what you've got now, so that you've got a really good starting point to get to where you want to be in the future. The reason that okay, no, I won't go into that. I'm going to hand over. I'm going to hand over to Vicky now, and she'll actually talk about this issue, some of the difficulties with data that we have at an organisation, at a sector and industry level. Over to you.
Okay. So I just want to give a bit of background as to how we got here today and the work that the Workforce Council has been doing in developing some of these data dashboards for sector levels. My role initially with the Workforce Council was to be the policy coordinator and to coordinate the industry skill body function. So coming out of that, for the Health and Community Services, we produce the annual reports, which are on the middle of your tables, and that provided an overview of the industry, a lot of data around the growth in the industry, what the workforce is looking like, and then doing sector-specific chapters. But the purpose of that report was really to influence vet investment from the government. So when we did the sector chapters, we weren't really focusing too much on what each sector's workforce and its individual characteristics looked like. So over the last year, myself and my colleague Jeff Pang have been working on this and trying to develop more specific data to assist with workforce planning, but also to influence more investment that I'll talk about later on, as especially with the government moving to contestability and the changes to the vet investment framework in Queensland. So if I can just start off at the industry level of the data that we've been collecting, and then how we're moving into the sector data collection, and then how we're starting to look at workforce supply and demand and trying to map that. And there is quite a bit of paper on your tables that people put around, so I will refer to those documents throughout the presentation. So Health and Community Services in Queensland is the largest employer. As of February this year, there were 295,500 employees in Queensland working in Health and Community Services, which is 12.7% of total employment in Queensland. We're the fastest growing employer in Queensland, with by 2017 it's expected that there will be an additional 52,400 employees within the Health and Community Services. And it's useful to know, or it's important to know, that this growth has been continuing for the past 5 years, and the Health and Community Services industry has continued to grow even in times where there's been downturns, like with the mining boom or construction industry. One of the things that we're strongly stressing at the Workforce Council is that there's not a one-size-fits-all for workforce solutions for health and community services in Queensland, and to really, we need to get a focus on place-based approaches and place-based responses. In Queensland, Health and Community Services is always in the top 4 of employing industries in every region throughout Queensland. So even when you do look at Queensland Outback compared to Moreton Bay North, that does look quite of a low percentage, but that's still 7.6% of the employment for that region. Just to emphasise the need to look at the regional and data and think of place-based responses, is that when we do talk about the industry having this strong growth, we do need to look at what's happening within each individual region. So over the last year, from February 2013 to February 2014, the inner city Brisbane region grew, I think, by about 3,000 employees, whereas Queensland Outback actually declined by about 4,000 employees. So when we look at that, we do need to look at what's actually happening and what factors are actually affecting the industry in each of those areas. I just want to mention this, and then hopefully come back to this later throughout the presentation when we talk about some of the difficulties with the data that we're experiencing. But this is, as of February 2014, the top 10 employing occupations in Queensland, and Asian disabled carers, nursing support and personal care workers, and welfare support officers are in there. They've pretty much been consistently in there for the last couple of years. One of the other important things that we do when we're collecting the data is really looking at the demographics, not just of the population, but also of the workforce. So in Queensland, we do have an ageing population, and by 2031 there will be significant shifts of people into the 60+ age group. And then we have to look at our own industry and our own workforce. And the Health and Community Services has a medium age, I think it's of 43 years in the workforce, compared to other industries where the medium age is 39 years. So as the population's aging, so is our workforce, which is also going to impact upon service delivery. When we look at this, and we're looking at it from our industry level, this is when we've started to realise that in order to look at what's happening with demand and supply within our industry, we need to actually drill down to the sector-specific data. So on your tables you do have, it's the A4, it's a blue handout, and that's what we're calling our sector dashboards. There's also a A3 one there if people really want to see it. we've started looking at these, and they're using ABS data, so mainly from the census and mainly from labour force surveys. And in other sectors, we are using specific census data that they use, like for early childhood, they do an annual census, and we get that data. Looking at that, what I wanted to say is, this is where I want to come back to this, but I just want to draw your attention to, when we put this data together, we can only use the data that is available to us and as it's presented to us through ABS. So when we put this together, these are the occupations that we can identify, that we know, to the best of our knowledge, are actually going to be existing within the disability sector. There are issues with that, which I'll come to later, and that is because of the way that it's coded. We know that there's so many nursing support and personal care workers existing in Queensland, but when people actually self-identify through labour force surveys or through the census data, it doesn't actually specify which sector they are working in. So for some of this workforce data, we can do our best estimate, we can do some projections, but we can't always tell you exactly what proportion of those occupations are actually sitting within a sector. The disability labour force and the employment has been growing steadily over the last three quarters. So it went from 180 to 189 to 191,000 employees within disability. And interestingly, part-time employment seems to be increasing within that. Just going back to where we looked at the industry ageing workforce, we have started to look at, well, what does that look like per sector? The disability workforce, the highest cohorts of workers at the moment are within the 45 to 49 year age bracket, and the 50 to 54 for women. For men in the sector, it's 40 to 44 years and 45 to 49, which are the main ages. One of the things that we're looking at the moment is if we know what the future projections for the growth are, and we know what the current workforce looks like, we need to know where the future workforce and that supply of workers is coming from, and where people are going to get their skills to actually work in the sector. So at the moment, we've been looking at the VET, the vocational education training data, and this is only concentrating on the publicly funded training data. But from that, you can see that as an industry, health and community services has the largest share of the VET market and students in training out of all other industry groups within Queensland. And what's important to note is that over the next 5 years, it is projected that the health and community services industry, their share of VET qualifications will increase by 91,000. Now, if we're moving into a fully contestable training market, where students are actually, the funding is going to follow the students, and students will have more choice over their training, it's important that we're having some sort of influence, or we're knowing where we need to get people to spend their entitlements and where those qualifications need to be. Just looking at what that percentage of our share looks like when you split it up by the sectors, and I know it's a bit hard to see, but out of that 16%, disability only has about 4.3% of that. So that's all the qualifications that we would assign, so Certificate 3, Certificate 4 in disability, and other related courses which are on your tables. What that means instead of full qualifications for the last year of training, was that there was 2,726 students actually enrolled in a disability qualification, and that's been a decline of about 11% from the previous year. So one of the things that we've been doing at the Workforce Council, and there is a copy of this on everyone's desk, and it's the green one, if Stacy wants to. That's it. Is that we've started trying to look at, well, what does supply and demand look like for the industry as a whole, and then by each sector. And that's why we've developed the qualification and occupation matrix. We have been starting consultations with industry to fill this out a bit more and to give that advice, but what we have been doing is with changes to the vet investment policies with the Queensland Government, we've been developing qualification ranking criteria. It's basically what we're calling it. So what we're saying is we will give a qualification a ranking based upon its importance to industry, but we'll also give it a ranking based upon whether or not what we think it should be a priority for investment by government in order to boost those numbers. What we're trying to show is that we don't need to necessarily saturate the market. If we're moving to full contestability, we need to make sure that that funding is being directed where the priorities should be. Some of the challenges that we're having in matching supply and demand is that we do need access to timely and high quality training and workforce data. So at the moment, what we really have access to is the publicly funded vet market, which is only about 60% of the vet. So we are at the moment trying to access private vet data to build a better, to do a full market analysis. And we'd also need, we're also looking at getting access to higher education data as well so that we can track all occupations. Obviously, the changing service demand and the shifting policy landscape has an effect on how we put these documents together and how we prioritise. And then the Australia-New Zealand standard classifications of occupations, the ANSCO system, is one of the biggest hurdles for us when we want to come down to the sector level and actually profile what the workforce actually looks like. Just from the way that it's done, whether we do it from the 4-digit or we go down to the 6-digit ANSCO, which is more detailed, it still doesn't let us know who's working in what occupations and where they're working, which in turn makes it really hard for us to do, or for any sector to do, the workforce planning. And I guess I just wanted to pull that's an example of, that may paint a good picture for what the disability workforce is looking, but really at the moment that's our best guess, because that could actually be split across aged and community care and disability. So when we get to this level, I guess what's happened with us is, and we're glad that Jane invited us here today, is because this is the biggest hurdle for us in moving forward with this data work, because and we're calling it our data disappointment phase, which is where we've got the information on the qualifications, we've done the occupational mapping to the best that we can, we've done the qualification value, the investment priority, we're identifying where the skill and labour shortages are, not just within the industry as a whole, but by sector, and we're looking at occupational growth and including emerging roles, new and emerging roles that are coming about from a lot of policy reforms and shifts. However, when we do want to look at the sector data and report on that, and if we do want to profile the disability sector, we really are missing out on that sector-specific knowledge and the organisational data in order to fill those blanks for us. So I'm just going to pass over to Stacy because we've got just a bit of a discussion question.
Okay, so we've got a deliberately messy activity to do now. And I guess it demonstrates some of the difficulties that we face in terms of data and in terms of analysing and looking at the disability workforce. It also applies to the aged care and community services workforce, this same issue. And it's around job and role titles. In order to get sufficient data or in order to get quality data, we need to ensure that there's some consistency in language and job titles. So what I would like you to do is on each of the tables there will be post-it notes. I'd like you to take a few minutes to write down as many of the job titles as many of the roles that exist in your organisation. We were originally going to limit this to support worker positions, but we decided earlier this morning to make this about all roles, because that demonstrates the difficulty in, for example, what do people call management level or middle management positions? So there's team leaders, there might be coordinators, there's a whole range of things. So the first step is for you to think about the roles that exist within your own organisation. We'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. If you finish before 5 minutes, lucky you, what I'd like you to do is we're going to get you to put the post-it notes up on the whiteboards. Now, as you're putting them up on the whiteboards, we want you to put them either with or near job titles that are the same from other organisations. Yeah, so one job title per post-it note. Including volunteers. And no looking at the matrix. So we want the actual job titles that you've got within your organisation. And what we'd like to do is to group them. So we want to see what the job titles look in this room. So what I'll do is I'll get you to, if the job title's exactly the same, I'll actually get you to put the post-it note on top of the other one. That's the way. If they're similar, or if you think that they're similar, but they're not exactly the same, I'll get you to put them in the same kind of vicinity. And if we need to move over to this second whiteboard, we can expand them out. So keep grouping them, and we can move them if we need to move groups of post-its onto the second whiteboard. That might be a good idea. As I said, this is a deliberately messy activity.
We've noticed a preponderance of CEOs already up on the board, so maybe we need some workforce rationalisation. What do you think? Something that I've noticed in doing it for a provider that I volunteer for is that we really need to capture volunteer data as well. So your board members, your volunteer fundraisers, I think this is important data. We were talking about this. The Workforce Council, I sit on their board, and they cannot get volunteer data. So if we can broaden our thinking about who's actually in our workforce.
Okay, there's still a few of the post-its going up, but we can see the picture that we've developed. I must say, I knew that it would be a bit messy, but I didn't know it would be that messy. But I guess, yeah. I guess what we can see there is it's a very pretty colourful demonstration of the difficulty that we have in looking at, in clearly building a very clear picture of what our workforce looks like. So what we'll be working towards, and what we might do after lunch, is Vicky and I might sit up the back and try and make some sense out of this. But what was your reaction to doing that? Like, what did anybody get some kind of insight from doing that? What did that feel like? Did it feel as messy as it looked? Too many workers. Too many CEOs, somebody said. Yeah. There was a fantastic suggestion that it would be really cool to see this picture in line with pay points from the award. which would be, that would be another interesting but probably equally or even more messy process. But, that's something that we can begin to work towards and help us find a bit of consistency. So thank you for participating in that. That is actually a bit of research. So thank you for helping us along with that, and we'll make sure that, the results of that, plus all of the slides and the information will be available to you. Over to Vicky.
Oh, okay. And I do just want to put another bit of context around the purpose of that exercise and what we're here for today, and that's the need for information from the sector and from organisations in order to actually build a better profile and improve our data collection. Because if we were just to look at the Certificate 3, Certificate 4 and Diploma level qualifications and the job outcomes or the job occupations that are mapped to them, and this is what gets reported through ABS, this is where we talk about ANSCO. For those level qualifications, these are the choices of titles or occupations that we have in order to do our reporting. And these are not just specific to disability. So you will find that there will be welfare support workers, under youth work when we do their profile, there'll be residential care officers in aged care. These will go across about 3 or 4 different sectors. And that's just, again, why if we can start getting more sector data and we actually know what these job titles are within the organisations and what the pay scales are, we can then possibly do our own mapping or our own projections and our own methodology in order to get a better picture of what the disability sector really looks like. So the whole point of this is, and I've talked about data, but I guess it's why is it so important? And I think it's important because it allows us to build that clearer picture. It informs the workforce planning at the organisation, the sector and the industry level, which also fits in with our workforce planning framework. And it allows us to have more influence over telling our story. So when we do put up submissions or when we do positioning statements to government, if we own that data and we're confident in it, and it's not just coming from the top down, but from the actual sector itself, it's a lot more, it builds a more powerful story. And I just want to say also that during a time when there is a number of reforms happening, and this is just a map of my attempt at trying to capture most of the main reforms happening and affecting the whole health and community services industry just within Queensland, so not even including the federal level changes. When you look at this and it's systemic change that it is influencing, and we've got the fiscal strategies as well as if you look at Great Skills Real Opportunity, which is the vet investment framework, which really will influence the supply of our workforce. You really do have to think, well, we do have to get better at telling our own story and being able to position that and actually maybe influence more strongly some of the decisions being made. Particular interest to me is the move to the fully contestable training market, and this is one of the main impetus for me and my team wanting to get better data is that from 1st of July all government subsidised training will be contestable. That includes a user choice and other government subsidised training. That's also the Certificate 3 guarantee, where now this funding will actually follow the student and the student will be able to make more independent choices about where they receive their training and what courses they're actually studying. One of the other main impacts I think that's going to affect, especially health and community services, is that regional loading is going to be removed from subsidised training. So that's where we know that there are shortages out in regions about getting that supply of workforce, where RTOs are already delivering within thin markets. That's going to be an issue that we are probably going to have to be able to provide advice upon. And I was going to hand back to Stacy.
And I wasn't quite prepared for that. Okay, so what, in order for us to get the data that we need at the sector level, we need to be able to ensure that data is collected at an organisational level. So this workforce profile works both at sector and organisational level. So what we wanted to ask you to talk about now at your tables are these key questions. What data should we be collecting? What's missing from the current data? What are the mechanisms for data collection within your own organisation? And what's your best idea for collecting that at a sector level? So how can we ensure that we're actually building a sector level picture of our sector, of our workforce that's actually driven by you? That's actually driven by you providing a clear picture of what exists within your organisation. This has been a big challenge for a number of sectors, but I think we have an incredible opportunity to be able to do this, and by doing so, have a much stronger influence about ways forward. So we'd like to ask you at your tables, there's A4 sheets on your tables to take notes. So have a discussion at your table about those 4 questions, and take notes. And we'll get some feedback from you, particularly in relation to those final 3 questions. What's missing? What are the mechanisms for data collection within your organisation? And what's the best idea for collecting data at a sector level? Okay. If I could get you to have, how long do you reckon, Vicky?
10 minutes.
10 minutes?
15.
Yeah. Okay. We'll check in 10 minutes. Right, go. Okay, folks. We're just going to do a bit of feeding back now. So what we're going to do is we're going to get each table to feed back 1 question. It'll be random. We'll be selecting the tables at random. So you never know which one you're going to get. That's more for our amusement than yours. Okay, so the first question, what I'd like to hear from 3 tables is what data should we be collecting? So we'll start with this table. Who wants to feedback? Go on, Carly. So what data should we be collecting, Carly?
So we just talked about the where the demand is for our services, whether it's morning, night, weekends, versus what's actually being delivered now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. And that's really important information in terms of projecting future demand as well and seeing trends that occur over time. I'm going to move over to this table over here and ask you the same question. So what data should we be collecting?
We just confined this to the workforce data. And if I could wave my magic wand, I wanted to know the workplace implications of the ageing workforce. Does the risk of injury increase with age? We'll have to consider those things. Does the risk relate to isolated and the remote workforce? What affects them? The stress and psychological claims. Does any particular group, age, occupation have a higher risk? And what strategies are going to develop around that?
Excellent. Thank you. On this table back here, what data should we be collecting?
Basically, our answer to that was whatever's missing from the current data, so we moved on pretty quickly to the next question.
Excellent. So nice segue into the next question, and we'll ask this table here. What's missing from the current data?
I think you got to look at some of the speed at which we have turnover. The analysis we've been done is that half the people we recruit go within the first 6 months. And that's a real challenge for us about how do you integrate people into the organisation. And we were talking about it around the table saying, well, are we hiring for fit? Or are we just hiring for the sake of having someone to come in and deliver a service? And they're the challenges we're going to face.
Absolutely, absolutely. So length of tenure is a really important one. So this table here? What's missing?
We said the why behind the choice of sector or role, and that would then allow us to identify how to attract more people. For example, if we looked at male carers, why are male carers coming into the industry and that kind of thing?
Yep. So data that would support attraction. people into the workforce. Excellent. Okay. So was that 3? That was 2. All right. Do you want to feedback?
We were looking around our the workforce again and looking at obviously the qualifications and what particular qualifications, but also the cultural diversity of the staff to fit with the cultural diversity of our client base.
Excellent, thank you. Might come up to this table now and ask, what are some of the mechanisms for data collection in your organisation? Who wants to feedback?
Well, in our organisation, through rosters, pay sheets, the database that we collect the client hours that we work with, and reporting systems.
Excellent. Thanks, Felicity. So who's next? Have I been to this table yet? Forgive? No? Okay, cool. Awesome. So what are the mechanisms for data collection within your organisation?
We listed mainly the HR systems for employee demographics, payroll, which would include positions and salaries, training and development records for qualifications, and then obviously surveys for employee satisfaction to understand what it is they're looking for, their aspirations, and then also your customer surveys to better understand their needs and where they'd like to go.
Excellent. Okay. Yep, okay. Over here. So what are the mechanisms for data collection in your organisation? There's always a fight over who's going to feed back.
Well, I mean, as the previous table said, probably whatever system that you're using to collect your employee information in our organisation, that tracks, and also the standard reports that you set up in your reporting dashboard, for example, your reporting dashboard for the board or for any other instrumentalities that you've got to provide reports to.
Excellent, thank you. So what mechanisms exist in your organisation for collecting data?
Spreadsheets, Excel and payroll, and HR and payroll systems. There's internal reporting systems to the boards and management. Some people are using the track system. There's national office, and some of the bigger organisations sends its own templates that it's developed for data collection. Amongst our table, we started to realise that some of the organisations that have 100 plus people have an increased data reporting responsibility to government, so it kicks in after a certain number. And another data source was training registers.
Excellent. So what we're seeing here is that organisations are collecting a whole bunch of data. So a key question is, how do we begin to, or what are your best ideas for collecting data at a sector level? How do we actually capture some of this information at a sector level? Did you get that far? Which table's got this far? That one? Did you guys get, okay.
I guess some of our discussion was around to what end. I mean, sometimes when you look at the sector data, it's disproportionate to what our actual data or what reflects in our own organisations. So whenever you get the opportunity, you look at surveys and go, well, I don't really see what the outcome here is for us, even though you might want to participate. There's not so knowing what it is that you want out of the data is often problematic. So some of the stuff we talked about the recruitment stuff, you know, that information doesn't really filter back. So it's about ensuring that if you're going to collect the data, that it actually has some use to the organisation as well.
Absolutely, and we would absolutely want to see that. But I guess it's about, you know, ensuring that the data that we are collecting at a sector level is meaningful for organisations. And, you know, I think what we've been talking about in the presentation so far is about exactly what you said. It's about the fact that a lot of the sector level data is not meaningful. So how do we make it meaningful for organisations? Did you talk about some ideas here?
Following on from that really was just making it user-friendly and standardising the data required, so that for those who participate it is easier, and maybe group
titles and responsibilities, so it's easier to, so we're actually coming at it from the right, with the right focus.
Excellent. Thank you. And I will move up the front now. So this table here, just here, what were you put your hand up? You got to this question. So what are some of your best ideas?
Is it our table? Oh, do you want to talk, Jamie? You talk.
We had discussion around the fact that probably the best way to collect data would be some form of survey. You know, they had companies do Survey Monkey or something like that. Having specific questions for where you're directing, rather, you know, having it in user-friendly language, layman's terms. So, you know, when you're talking amongst government bodies and things, it can get, you've got acronyms and all sorts of jargon that gets thrown around. But yeah, if you want to break down those questions into a way that just about anybody could answer them, and yeah, I think in the internet these days, you know, we can do it at a pretty cost-effective level as well, and maybe have some time frames around that as well. So, you know, because a lot of people will look at that sort of thing in an email and go, oh no, I won't do it just because I haven't got time now. But if you said to them, hey, you've got 2 weeks to do this, I think that would be a good motivator as well. So yeah, and maybe looking at there's obviously a lot of, we've had a little bit of a discussion here about stuff that was around the quality, you know, NDIS being quality for the person coming to a service, but at a worker level, I think the job satisfaction and quality for the worker is being sacrificed in a huge way, or that is a perceived feeling anyway. And I think there needs to be some questions asked around that and maybe looked at in a data way. So, I mean, we already seen this morning from your talk that students were down by 11%. So people are looking at the work and going, maybe I haven't got a secure work there, you know, job there in my future, so I'll go somewhere else, is what I'm thinking. And I'm at a support worker level myself, so I'm seeing that around a lot of people in other companies as well, and they're saying, well, maybe it's time I went somewhere else because I can't get permanent part-time or full-time work here. So yeah, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that's what we talked about.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I will hand over to Jane now to answer this final question, and she might very well take it from there. So,
what else? Oh yeah. And then what? Oh, then the voting. Okay, thank you. I wanted to talk about a couple of mechanisms or ideas for collection of data. I take your point about timeframes, but tell me I've got 2 weeks to do something and I'll take 3. So, you know, how can we incentivise people, I hate that word, but I just used it, to complete surveys. So if we think about increasingly peak bodies like NDS and Workforce Council have to, you know, develop their own kind of business strategies, so do a lot more fee-for-service work. So this data, if we can get fine-grained data, that becomes a product or a service that Workforce Council, for example, could on-sell. So how are we paying back to the sector for that data to be fed up into the kind of sector-wide data? And so what's the incentive? Is it actually a monetary incentive? You get the data back at a sector-wide level at a reduced cost or free, or don't tell Laura I said that. And also not just the monetary rewards, but the incentive of getting kind of your regional data or, you know, that kind of stuff. So it has to be kind of a win-win, I think, is part of the... otherwise, why should providers almost, apart from the fact that it would be useful to them in their workforce planning and development, get a lot of people saying, well, why the hell would I do this? And we need good sample size in order to get good data. So I think we need to build in some things like that. The organisational development toolkit, which some of you will be familiar with, Workforce Council and NDS are hoping to do some one-to-one support across community services, NDS doing it specifically in the disability sector, and I'm wondering whether we can... Ian, can we build something into the... whether we could actually use that as a trigger, you know, that's part of the commitment. If you want free one-to-one support around this toolkit, then these are some of the things we're going to need back from you. Or whether it actually can be built into the toolkit, capturing some of that relatively not too fine-grained, but relatively. Yeah, so if you haven't heard about the organisational development toolkit, they're in your folders, the little cards there. And Carolyn was talking here about some of that common language, and I think you're right. You know, I wonder whether if we were doing surveys, if you could just hover over whatever we've called the support worker role, and so long as it's got some commonalities, that's the, you know, I think it's clear that we're going to have trouble getting real clarity around the boundaries between jobs. Len was talking about the rimfire, where they captured, what was it called? The rimfire report, benchmarking report, wasn't it? And it was about, correct me if I'm wrong, actually, I'll just get you tell them.
Going back some years, NDS did a benchmarking survey in Queensland, 2007 actually. And within that, we surveyed a number of organisations around a whole range of workforce issues. One of those was about capturing all of the positions descriptions that organisations had. And what happened was Rimfire then went away and analysed all of the PDs and then came up with a common thread, a common set of key skills required for particular descriptions. So while you might call someone a support worker or a carer in another organisation or something else, they gathered all those together and then came up with a typical PD for organisations to look at. Now a lot of that's probably still relevant and it's still within NDS, so it could be brought out, but but it's very valuable, I think, if you wanted to look at what the typical role would be. But having said that, the way the NDIS environment is going, that's going to shift. So people who are typically working now in organisations in particular roles are going to have to change the way they think and how they deliver services in the future. So it might be relevant now, but coming into the future, it may not be so relevant.
Thanks, Len, for giving us that job to do. So what we're going to ask you to do now, it's lunchtime, is it? Yep, nearly lunchtime. Yep, so hand over your best ideas. You want me to talk to this now? Yep. We're going to get you to vote. You've got some dots in the middle of the table. So over lunchtime, we'll have them up here. As you come back in, yes, clearly I didn't get myself briefed too well. So grab a strip, 3 dots is it? 3 dots each. No cheating, Mo. Just kidding. So 3 dots each. And when we've got these up during lunch, as you're coming back in, if you would please grab those dots and put against things that you might or would be prepared to commit to. Or I guess if you vote on what you think the best idea is, even if it's something you can't commit to, your CEO's not here or whatever it is. So yeah, what you think are the 3 best ideas or what you might be prepared to commit to doing if we could set it up in terms of feeding this organisational level data up into sector level data. Yes, are people with me? So yes, what else do you want to do before lunch? Nothing? Give them an early mark? Yeah, questions, discussion, anything that was in your feedback notes that you'd like to highlight that wasn't? Anything you'd like to explain before people vote on it? Because after all, it will be a popularity contest. Anybody? No? Anyone? Come on, someone must have had a genius idea that they never got a chance to talk about. Ken?
Jane gave mention to the toolkit. One of the things, I presented in Melbourne last year at the Practical Design Fund, and one of the concerns I have for all of us as organisations isn't just about workforce management, is how are we going to survive as independent businesses? And that toolkit that's been developed is there to help all of us come to terms with where we're at as a business. And we can sit here and talk about workforce, but at the end of the day, are we going to cope with the challenges that are going to confront us as a business, not a community service, but as an individual business, because they're the challenges that I believe that are going to really confront us. And I think the work that the guys have done on that project should not be underestimated. And I noticed there's a workshop on the Gold Coast about are you business ready? And I think that's fundamentally one of the important things we need to come to terms with.
Thanks, Ken. I wasn't sure where that was going. I was mighty relieved. Thanks for the free plug. Anybody else? I don't know what the Gold Coast workshop is. It's what? Oh, yeah, it's one of the viability and sustainability workshops. Okay, many of those sector readiness workforce capacity initiative workshops are about to finish up in June, but those resources will live on the sector readiness clearinghouse and certainly the organisational development toolkit. We're very keen to start providing one-to-one support and group support, some more kind of workshops for people to work through that because it can be quite daunting. And having the courage to answer the questions really honestly can be quite daunting too.
Just to add to what Jane's saying, in thinking about your question, we're currently doing some more development work on the functionality of the organisational development toolkit throughout June. So it's a very real opportunity today to think about, in answering that question, if any of you are that familiar with the toolkit, how we might be able to build some things into that toolkit that could facilitate this. Yeah.
Anybody else with a free plug for NDS? No.
Okay, I just wanted to do a bit
There's
of...
someone here.
Okay.
I will be quick.
Just going on to your win-win to make it worthwhile for someone to fill the data out, one of the things we discussed here was providing the software that we as an organisation would be useful in the data collection that can then be uploaded to your service. And that's a win-win. That's right, yeah, or potentially build a database that's useful to you or as an organisation.
Thank you. That's actually a nice segue. We don't have a database, but we do have training in workforce planning and development that includes tools for profiling your current workforce that organisations have adapted to use as their HR database. But that's definitely something that I want to do into the future for the Workforce Council. So it's really nice to hear that coming from somebody in the sector. So I just wanted to do a bit of an ad for the Workforce Council. We do have a range of consultancy services if you are looking to develop your workforce plan. We also run different training workshops in workforce planning and development. There's one coming up in July if you are interested in doing a workforce planning skill set. Through that workshop, you actually develop a beginning draft of a workforce plan, a good solid start to the workforce plan for your organisation. So if you are interested in that, my business cards and Vicky's business cards are on the table. But if you'd like me to send you the information about the workshop, it's not quite ready yet, or I would have bought it today, please give me a business card or send me an email and I'll make sure that you're on that distribution list.
Stacy, I think also if you keep an eye on that Disability Workforce Innovation Network, I think there will be clear links to the Workforce Council's work in workforce planning and development skill sets. They may not know it yet, and I'm sorry for being circumspect, but that's kind of the way we're going. You know, some of the skills that we can deliver across the sector in workforce planning and development, and there's no question that the Workforce Council is ahead of the game in Australia, I think, in teaching that specifically in disability. So watch this space.
And also, just to add what Stacey's saying, if people would like a taster of that work, Stacey's currently developing an online business module to support the toolkit, which is on the clearinghouse. You've got the green cards, you can access it there in about 2 weeks.
So clearly, I think there's really, it's one thing, it's survey the sector. Collect data from organisations across an organisation, from, you know, sort of DSWs to board members, but also that it must be incentivised in some way, whether that's just by getting your data back in a report form, or whether it's built into the organisational development toolkit. The other key theme was this kind of common language or common understanding of shared understanding, I guess, of what a job role name might mean. So a bit of the stuff Len was talking about in terms of theming job roles and yeah, getting that common language. So, I mean, simple, we can do that next week. I mean, you've given us a really clear message. There's no confusion about what you want, and I'm going to assume that in picking your best ideas, you are happy to engage in that kind of activity too. So thanks.